Welcome to the WagerTalk Podcast for the week ending July 8th. We've got a big show tonight. He's back third week in a row. Ralph, this is, I think, the first time for the podcast that we've had the same guest 3 weeks in a row.
Marco, it's hard to find people with less hair than us, but we found one with Carm, so it's always good to have him on.
Well, that's the reason. Well, he is the record holder for the most number of views of a video, so, we had to have him on 3 times, but,
Wow, you should have seen his face, Carm, when he said that.
But that is Carmine Bianco. He's going to be joining us talk World Cup. We're into the nitty-gritty now, the final 8. We'll be talking with him. Also tonight, Steve Pugh, the creator of the website CompughterRatings.com, will be on the air with us tonight, telling us about his website. We'll have Handicappers Corner, another topic tonight that Ralph and I will break down. And then, of course, we'll take a look at 3 big baseball games this weekend. And, of course, best bets at the end of the show. We bragged about the best bets last week. We can't brag this week, Ralph. We took the caller. You didn't because yours was a scratch thanks to a pitching change. But an 0-3 on the best bets last week. So it's bounce back weekend for us with the best bets tonight. And Mark Seidel joins us behind the controls. And I'm your host, Marco D'Angelo. Let's get this party started. Let's welcome in tonight's first guest. He is WagerTalk's own Carmine Bianco. You can follow him on Twitter at Carmine Bianco WT. Carmine, my man, we're down to the final 8, and I know you're excited about one of those 8, that team called Croatia, excuse me. Can't talk today. Croatia. I can't even talk tonight. So excited for that futures bet you got. What was the price you got on that one?
Yeah, actually, 3 of the 8 remaining teams were three of the teams that I have futures on. So Croatia, which we talked about in that video before the World Cup started,
is that
40-1.
That the video that you got all those views on?
Yes, all those Roger Maris views. Yes, that would be it. No, Croatia at 40-1. The idea at the time was they were a team that I thought could go extremely deep in this tournament, and when you got a 40-1 ticket, any smart gambler can find a way of hedging it out. So I'm not sure I want to do it in this round, but if we get into the semifinals, I'll look at options.
On Friday, we've got the early match puts Uruguay against France. The Westgate here in Las Vegas has France minus 105, Uruguay plus 350, and the draw is plus 215 on the 3-way line, and we've got a total of 2, and the under is the favorite at minus 125. How are you seeing this matchup?
This, much like the other 3 matchups, we've got 4 games where the lines are fairly tight, whether it's the 2-way line, 3-way line, or the total. 3 of the 4 totals are 2 the over/under are 2 shaded to the under. As far as this game here, obviously this is a great game. One of the we've got one of the 2 remaining South American teams in Uruguay, obviously Brazil being the other. And, they've done what they've had to do so far. They were in a pretty easy group with Russia, who are still in it, and Saudi Arabia and Egypt. But they've done what they've needed to do. Here's the problem, tomorrow morning is, their best striker, Edison Cavani, is going to miss the game. Reports up until about an hour ago, before we went to air here, have him definitely missing the game. He may start from the bench, but even there, his effectiveness against a very good France midfield and defense is going to be tough. So he's going to be missed. So I think the game plays much tighter than it normally would. And, Uruguay still have a fantastic back line. So, the total is 2 shaded to the under for a reason. I definitely see this as a very close game throughout. And we've seen this in many of the matchups in the World Cup. You got 2 very good teams here, but it's more of, looking at it in another aspect as more of a chess battle to, moves back and forth and just trying to slowly break down a team.
In the second game on Friday, Belgium plays Brazil. Brazil on the three-way line plus 110, Belgium plus 255, the draws plus 240. Two-way line, I saw Brazil about minus 170, Belgium plus 150. Total about 2.5, under 125. Brazil now the favorite. Is that something you expected, or are we getting the reputation of Brazil leading into this line and where they are ranked?
Very good question. I think it's a little of both. Coming into this tournament, Brazil was the favorite to win this tournament at 4-1, and after the first couple of games of the group stages, and after a few upsets, they dropped to 3.5-1. But they've got a fantastic team, top to bottom, a lot of talent. The thing is, Belgium have an equally quality type team. There's a lot of EPL players on that squad. That it's going. I think it's the best game of the four. Definitely is. It's the one total that is not 2. It's 2.5, but it's shaded to the under. And the reason it's 2.5 is quite simple. Brazil and Belgium both have sides that at any time, whether they're attacking, counter-attacking, can put together 2-3 quick passes, and it's in the net. So I think it plays a lot closer than that. I'd probably lean to the under 2.5 here. The thing is, Brazil with their friendlies in 2018, Brazil with their friendlies and their World Cup games so far. And usually I wouldn't pinpoint friendlies because it's just what they are, friendlies. But these were actual warm-ups to the World Cup. They played 8 games, including the 4 so far in the World Cup. They allowed 1 goal, and that was to Switzerland on match day 1. They've kept 7 clean sheets. So this Belgian team, who's been the highest scoring team in the World Cup, aren't just going to come in and lay over Brazil. I wouldn't expect them to anyways. So I think, once again, these are 2 teams that are going to play a very tight game. And at the end of the day, obviously, I'm pulling for Belgium for the sheer fact that I also have a future on them at 11-1. But that's not the deciding factor on who I'll eventually go with.
Let's put that in perspective for a minute. You have the current odds, and again, there's odds at a lot of different places, but Croatia is about 6-1, Belgium is about 6-1, and you have 40-1 on Croatia and 13-1 on Belgium?
I have 11-1 on Belgium. Before the first game on WagerTalk, anyone who bought the first play or took advantage of the World Cup package were given 3 futures other than the Croatia at 40-1. They're also given France at 7-1 and Belgium at 11-1. I thought that we'd see these teams at the very least in the quarterfinals with a possibility of semifinal or final appearances for either or both. Now, obviously, they're on the right side of the bracket, so they can only meet in the semifinals. But if you have a France future at 7-1 and a Belgium future at 11-1, and they're playing in the semifinals, I think you're in a very good spot. Either one of them will be favored. If they met in the semifinals, either one of them would be favored in the final.
One more question real quick before we move on to the next round of games. I went back and looked at the last 3 World Cups when we got down to this round. And of those games, if I'm looking at a total of 2, 4 went over, 6 went under, and 2 pushed. Is there any carryover from one World Cup to the next with when the competition gets this tight? Or are the teams so different it really doesn't matter what the historic numbers have been?
No, I don't think the historic numbers come into this. Different teams, different players, also different atmospheres. Obviously one thing that happened 4 years ago in Brazil and one thing that's happening now in Russia, and you have to take this into consideration, is the extreme heat that these players are playing in. It takes a toll on these players. So whether it's a slower pace early on or during the game, there's also, they'll stop the game 30 or 40 minutes in and have like hydration breaks. This kind of kills the flow of a game. You have to take that, something like that into consideration. Not too many people look at a game and look at a total and actually think about okay, this game is being played in extreme heat. You know, I mean, also the factor of any tight game that may go into extra time, which is the 2 15-minute periods. You sort of have to stretch out your bench. You get 3 changes, and if a game goes into extra time, they're allowed a 4th change. This is why we're seeing lower totals. Normally, we'd see 2.5s. We see them pretty much every weekend in domestic league soccer. You see 2.5 and 3s, but here we're seeing 2s, and it's shaded to unders. And you have teams like Uruguay and France who can score, Brazil, Belgium who can score. So they're not telling you anything other than the fact that they're lower scoring games.
Moving on to Saturday, Carmine, the early game has England and Sweden matching up. England's minus 115, Sweden's plus 375. The draw is plus 230 on the three-way. Again, total of 2 shaded to the under at minus 115. And the numbers that I'm quoting, I'm taking from the Westgate here in Las Vegas. I grabbed these numbers shortly before we went on the air. How are you seeing that first one on Saturday?
I actually think that the England-Sweden game, surprisingly so, I think it could be one of the better of the 4 games. Obviously, I'm looking forward to watching the Belgium-Brazil game, but I actually think it could be one of the better games. Sweden, this is a different Sweden team. They're sort of the post-Latin era. It's a younger team. They played tremendous defensively so far, but when they've had to play offense, they've done it well. Case in point is the final game of the group stage where they played Mexico. I don't think many people expected them to beat Mexico, and they literally shell-shocked them with that. I believe it was a 3-0 win. England play. This is probably the best English team I've seen in the World Cup. As far as as long as I've been watching, they play a great attacking style. They're very good defensively, but I have to say, in that last game against Colombia, they played a great 75 minutes of football, and then the last 15 minutes they seemed to revert back. And this is the last 15 minutes of regulation time, regulation 90. They seem to revert back to the England of old. And now, I'm not just saying that because they allowed a 93rd minute goal, which killed one of my plays, and sent the game to extra time before they eventually won it in penalties. But you have to be leery of a team that sometimes loses it late, and this is what they did. Sweden is going to come in. They're not going to make many or any mistakes. They're just going to play their same methodical game. And England has to come out on their front foot. They literally have to take the game to Sweden and break through first, because if they don't, they're in trouble.
I'll tell you what, I'm not a huge soccer fan. I've enjoyed the World Cup. I watched the entire game of England and Colombia, and when that one replacement came in and in the 88th minute or whatever hit that shot from 30 yards that went wide right, it just, after that was the kick, and it just ignited Colombia. That one missed shot, it was incredible that we talk about momentum, and you don't think soccer has momentum. Well, that's not true if you watch that match.
No, definitely so. This is one of the things with sort of, the making the right changes, bringing in the right guys. It has such an effect on teams. A perfect example is the Belgium-Japan game. No one thought that Japan had a shot, and they had Belgium on the ropes, down 2-0 in the second half, and I think I've mentioned it on Twitter. Japan did something that no other team has done in the World Cup. Japan, up 2-0 with 30 minutes to go, continued to play. You didn't have guys falling on the ground, time wasting, coming up with cramps that aren't really there. They continued to play, and it obviously hurt them in the end. But Belgium made 2 changes in the second half, and the 2 players they brought in both scored. And this is the importance of having a manager who can make the changes that affect the game. And that's what happened in the Colombia game. They made the changes that affected the game, much like you said, and they took that momentum away from England and probably could have won that game. You know, when penalties are a crapshoot, none of us like to decide a game in penalty kicks. I'm Italian. I've watched my team lose in penalty kicks many years in the World Cup before we finally won one against France. So, there is such a thing as momentum, in football.
Final game is the host team, and very few people thought they'd be at this stage. Croatia against Russia. Three-way line, Croatia plus 120, Russia plus 280. The draw is plus 200. Total is 2 minus 120. If you're looking at the two-way line or the team to advance, Croatia about a 165, Russia plus 150. Is Russia a Cinderella that can continue? Or as Marco typed out for me, is this where the clock strikes midnight?
Well, I'm hoping this is where the clock strikes, midnight. But, this is a Russia team that obviously, got into this tournament as the host nation. They're putting it into a fairly easy group, with the exception of Uruguay, who are still in it. And, they lost 3-0 to Uruguay, but they beat everyone else that were put in front of them. They were giving Saudi Arabia, and they blew them out 5-0, in the tournament opener. They beat Egypt 3-1. They got, you can make excuses along the way every single time. They played Spain in the round of 16, and, as we saw, this was not the Spain that we're used to seeing. They never really got rolling. That first game against match day 1 against Portugal, it was probably their best game in a draw, a 3-3 draw. But after that, they never looked in sync offensively, and they never did against Russia. So it just seemed like they were never again on their front foot. Russia did what a lot of teams have been doing in the World Cup. They stretched the game out. They got it to extra time, and this is the thing. When a team has a decided disadvantage, they do what needs to be done to try and stretch the game out and give themselves a chance to win it late. It's the same, pretty much the same in any sport. They did it. Can they do it again? Well, if you're looking at the lines, the books are saying there's a possibility. Croatia's plus 126 on any other given day and not a quarterfinal match. Croatia is probably about a 160 to 170 favorite over Russia, at least in my books. So I still think Croatia gets it done. They've played extremely well in this tournament and in the lead up to this, and they had every reason to give up, early. When Denmark scored 2 minutes in the round of 16 game, and they came back and they struck back quickly and literally took control of that game, although winning it again, in penalties. So, I have a future on Croatia, but this is not why I see them getting through, to the semifinals.
Carm, I'm going to put you on the spot. Here's $100. I don't care who you bet. It doesn't matter who you bet previously. It doesn't matter what you've said about any team. I'm giving you $100. Brazil 3-1, France 4-1, England 4-1, Croatia, Belgium 6-1, Uruguay 16-1, Russia 20-1, Sweden 25-1. Where are you putting that $100?
Well, the problem is one side of that bracket is a little tough. So yeah, the money on the money on France. I've said it before. This France team is, I think they've got some tremendous talent top to bottom, and they're going to be a team that competes in competitions, sort of going forward. The Euros in 2 years, and 2 years after that, the World Cup. I think they'll be the favorites in each one of those tournaments, or one of the favorites. I think they get by Uruguay tomorrow, based just on the better quality on the team, but also the fact that Uruguay is a little handicapped with losing a player. It's going to be a tough one, but I feel like they'll get by Uruguay, which sets up obviously a great game against either Brazil or Belgium, but they would be the favorites sort of moving forward. The other half of the bracket's a little tougher. The Brazil-Belgium game could go either way, so it's tough for me to take a future on either one of them at this point. On the other side of the bracket, likely England. As much as I like Croatia still has to get by Russia, and Croatia would be a dog to England. So, looking at that, England is favored on Saturday. They would be favored in the semifinal match, although they would be a small dog against any one of the four teams, any one of the three teams other than, let's say, Uruguay in the final.
Carmine, do you have a package up at WagerTalk that you'd like to tell our listeners about?
I do. I've got a Friday double play in the World Cup, and obviously it kicks off at 10 a.m. as well. I think that the Saturday card will be up shortly. I think the better thing for if anyone is looking at buying a package is buying the 3-day weekend package, which is Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It'll include the Saturday's MLS card, and I have a big Saturday MLS card, of which I'll give out a free play on that card. But I've also put up 4 additional wagers on teams to advance out of this quarterfinals. So if they pick up that package, they're getting the Friday and Saturday World Cup cards, the 4 additional team to advance selections, and then a full MLS card for Saturday.
All right, good stuff as always. Carmine, appreciate you stopping by and dropping the knowledge on us with the World Cup. Continued success with the World Cup, and we will talk to you soon down the road.
All
Thanks,
right, guys.
Carm.
Take care. Have a good one.
All right, guys. We've got coming up on the next segment, we will be talking with Steve Pugh and his website, telling you how you can use it to help you become a better handicapper this football season. That'll be up next after a short break here on the WagerTalk Podcast.
It's Manic Monday, and that means every pick at WagerTalk.com is just $9. Get a play in any sport valued at up to $30 for just $9 each and every Monday at WagerTalk.com.
We are back, and tonight's next guest is Steve Pugh. He is the creator of the website CompughterRatings.com, and I'll spell that for you guys. That is CompughterRatings. And the reason being, Steve Pugh, he named it after the site there. A nice little play on words, Steve. And want to bring you in. I'm going to be honest with you, Steve. Welcome to the show. I wasn't aware of your website till Ralph introduced me to it. And I got to say, I'm quite impressed with the information. I'd like you just to give our listeners a little intro to the site, and then I'm going to kick it over to Ralph, and he's going to carry the rest of the interview because he is much more familiar with the site. But I can tell you I'm going to be using a lot of it. I like what I saw.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the compliments on the site, too. And I'll tell you, probably the reason why you haven't heard it is marketing isn't my number one skill. So I'm glad to hear that it's useful to you. But I created this website. Believe it or not, it's been around since 2007. I started working early on with Kenneth Massey, who was one of the original computer folks with the BCS system for college football. And it just started out as an interest, really, for me. Having a math background, Kenneth and I both went to Virginia Tech. We both studied math at Virginia Tech. And so I kind of worked under his tutelage for a while and got the website up and running just to showcase my college football, and then over time started adding more sports to it. And then a few years ago decided to monetize it because it was getting enough hits where it looked like it made sense to probably monetize it by this time.
You know, Steve, is there a better intro in college football than Enter the Sandman?
No. In fact, when I'm working out, that's one of the songs that always comes on.
You know, Steve and I
every time.
Steve and I go back to when I was at Phil Steele days, and we conversed often and went through the site. College football was the first site that you opened at CompughterRatings.com?
Yes, it was the first sport.
You know, and we talked, you know, Marco and I do a segment each week about handicappers, and with more and more states with sports gaming becoming legal and going to be part of an everyday type situation, we started doing shows on what people need to look at and where people can go to get valuable information. And that's, how I thought about you. Let's go over your college football site. When you go to Compughter Ratings, it has each sport, but for free each week, you have your power ratings, the record, the previous ranking, and then the offense and defensive ratings. And that's something we've talked about in the past here on this show. The NCAA numbers are so skewed that when you're in the Pac-12 or in the Big 12, your offensive ratings, you may be averaging 480, 490, 500 yards a game, but that does not mean you're the best offense. Likewise, if you're playing in a division that has very weak offenses, just because you allow 320 or 330 yards per game, that doesn't mean you're the best defense. Tell us what goes into making those numbers and why they're so special compared to an NCAA rating.
So what goes into those numbers is just taking into consideration the game scores, the margin of victory, home field advantage, strength of schedule. And strength of schedule goes a little bit further than just who are the opponents that you played, but who are your opponent's opponents and your opponent's opponents, right? It keeps going. I have an iterative mathematical model that takes all that into consideration, and also game recency, too. So big wins later in the season certainly count more than wins earlier in the season. So all those factors go into it, and I'm able to produce, like you said, an overall performance rating, but then also offensive and defensive ratings, and then what I call a power rating, which says something a little bit more about how that team is expected to perform in the future, not really a measurement of how it performed in the past like the overall rating is.
And then when you go into those ratings and you're looking at college football teams, when you click on a team, it just opens up an avenue of more information. You have their power ratings, a number and a grade, the overall rankings. And for someone that is looking when you're comparing stats, I'll tell you what, I love, and I've used for years and continue to use, your rankings of the schedule, both current and future, where you'll be able to compare both what they've done in the past and what you expect them to do in the future. Have you found that more valuable in college football in the NFL, or are they both similar?
I think they're both similar, but college football certainly it's a little bit different because it's not like the same 32 teams who are all relatively the same strength. It's a lot less parity there. So I think probably in college football it's a little more telling what the strength of schedule rating is.
One thing I look at and how I found your site originally was me handicapping college basketball. And finding information on the power teams is great. Finding information on all 351 teams is something different. And one example I want to give for our customers to be able to use, if you go back and when you go to CompughterRatings.com, and that's PUGH for the pewter part of it, you're going to look at college basketball. You see all 351 teams. And then when you click on a team, you get to see their progressions through the year. One example I want our viewers to look at is when you go there and you go to college basketball, you go to Michigan. We know Michigan was a completely different team from beginning to end. When I looked at your numbers, Steve, back on December the 8th, Michigan was the number 68 team in your rankings. When it got to February 23rd, they were the 23rd team. And by March 9th, they were a top 12 team that we saw went deep into the tournament that played great offense and defense. So, what's the most useful thing for our listeners to use on your site? Or what feedback have you gotten that is the most detailed that people prefer?
That's a great question. I mean, I get a lot of feedback from users of the site. As you know, I don't place wagers myself, but I've learned that a lot of folks use this data for placing wagers. But I'll have to ask for your expertise on exactly how they're using it.
Well, again, in college basketball, like you said, when you're talking, you sort of went into it with college football. College football, you have the 128, 130 teams. And basically, when you compare the NFL, it's like being in the SEC West. From 1 to 5 is basically what the NFL is, or from 1 to 6 in the West. 1 to 7, actually. But in college basketball, when you have the 351 teams and you're giving an offensive and defensive ranking for each team, I find that clearly the most valuable.
Interesting.
Looking, one of the things that I enjoyed, and I know it's relatively new to the site, is you've been putting some MMA together with the UFC and stuff. And for a guy like myself, Steve, I'm not a guy that's, follows the UFC, but it's becoming more popular as we go. And I like the matchups that you have, the way that you can put the two fighters side by side and look at them. It's really a unique tool, and I like how it lays everything out. And then you can see the last 5 fights that each guy had. It's a good, quick reference chart. And then you guys are also creating a probability score of how you see the fight going. Tell us a little bit about that section.
Oh, sure. So UFC is relatively new. I just rolled it out about 2 months ago, and I started working on it probably 4 or 5 months ago. It's a very different model, but it was a ton of fun to work on. It's a little more complex than for team sports, simply because there isn't really a scoring system. There isn't a scoring system. And so basically what I had to do was create a scoring system that was based on the severity of a win or a loss. So what I mean by that is, winning a split decision doesn't equate to a very large margin of victory, right? So in football terms, that might be a 7-6 fight, right? Similarly, knocking out an opponent in the first round has a larger margin of victory than knocking them out in the third round, right? So I created a scoring system that doesn't really mean anything to anyone except for this model, but it enables me to come up with a margin of victory and then I can use the same data points as I was using for team sports, like strength of opponents, fight recency, and things like that. And I'm able to use that to basically predict what the quote-unquote score would be for a UFC fight, and then I'm able to use a pretty simple formula to convert that score into win probabilities. So this feature is free on the site right now. All of my game simulations for football and basketball and things like that, you get a few free every day, but then that's the thing that my users of the site pay for. But for UFC right now, it's free because it's a work in progress, and I'm just measuring it out to see how well it does. But it was a ton of fun to put together. I'm glad you're getting some use out of it.
Yeah, good stuff. I mean, and anytime you can find information out there that breaks numbers down into a different way, because like you said, Ralph and I have been talking about how you got to not get consumed by just raw numbers, because when they're doing it at the beginning of the season, these numbers are so skewed when they're playing soft schedules, and that being able to come up with a true number and incorporating schedule strength and everything else in there, that is an invaluable tool. And I encourage our listeners to check out your site for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Marco, when gamblers are going to use this site. When they find this site, they're going to use it. But I'll tell you what, just to be knowledgeable in different sports, an example I'm going to use is I am not a NASCAR fan, but when you click on his NASCAR site and you click on, Kevin Harvick, you're going to see he's the number 1 rated. He rates every NASCAR race. You're going to see what he's done his last 8 or 10 races or whatever it is year to date. You're going to see his year to date percentage on laps he's led. You're going to see other Ford cars that are in that same family on how you want to rank them. So this is something that just when you're at a bar and you want to know something about some team, what they've done, it also has last year's scores. I mean, it breaks down so many sports. I have it on my phone. It's an easy-to-read format. I know there's an app as well. Steve, why don't you walk us through, again, the site information, the app information, and what the prices are for those that know they're going to use the site throughout the year and want to take advantage.
Okay, sure. Yeah, so when I first started monetizing things, the way I did that was coming out with a mobile app. So the mobile app was the first time where I was actually charging money for the service. And so at that time, I took the opportunity to rebrand it. I called it Versus Sports Simulator. It came out for Android in 2012, and I think for iPhone in 2013. I plan to rebrand the website eventually as well, just so folks know that eventually it'll be versussportsimulator.com. Right now, when you go to that website, it's just a marketing site for the mobile app. But if you download the mobile app from iTunes, there's a couple of different things. It offers in-app purchases in the mobile app. So you get the rankings free. You actually get conference rankings free, too, which is not something that is even visible on the website. So that's an extra bonus that you get for downloading the app. And then if you purchase one of the in-app purchases, you get predictions, all the game predictions for every single game that's played during the regular season, postseason, and you also get unlimited game simulations, which is a lot of fun for a lot of folks because there's interest I find in, take North Dakota State fans, for example, FCS team, and they want to know how their team would perform against Big Ten teams, for example. It gives them the opportunity to simulate all those games and see exactly how their team would perform if they were in the Big Ten, which is kind of cool. The prices for the in-app subscriptions it's $14.99 for 1 month or $29.99 for the full year.
Which do most people use? Sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
What's that?
I said, which one do most people get?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. You and I were talking about it the other day. I guess it all depends on the timing, right? So if you just came across and you wanted to download the app and you only had a month left in the basketball season, it probably would make sense or if you just wanted to try it out, you risk less money to buy the 1 month subscription. The website billing model is a little bit different, though. It's just a flat $29.99 per month, and you get all sports. There's also a 6-month and a 1-year subscription where those prices come down a little bit just because it's stretched out over a longer period of time. All of these prices are subject to change, of course, but right now that's what they are.
We talked about college football, and we talked about having all the teams in college football. But I'll tell you what, Steve's programs include the FCS, like he talked about, Division II, Division III, and even NAIA. So even if you're just a fan of a football team that doesn't get a lot of press, it's great to know what a prediction is going into the games you're going to be playing. Incredible the depth that this site has with all the different layers.
Good stuff, Steve. We appreciate you joining us tonight. And once again, I'll tell our listeners to check that out, and we'll include a link to the site with the podcast. But you can check out the site at CompughterRatings.com, and that's Computer, COMPUGH, ratings.com. So check that out. Steve, we appreciate you coming on the show tonight. Continued success with the site, and we'll be talking to you sometime down the road.
It's all my pleasure. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, it will be Handicappers Corner.
Every Tuesday, WagerTalk.com offers a best bet selection from its hottest handicapper. It's a great way to introduce yourself to WagerTalk.com with a big best bet winner for just $2 on $2 Tuesday.
We're back, and it's time for our new segment, Handicappers Corner. As Ralph, as we know, with the states passing, we've got Delaware and New Jersey with the sports betting, more to follow. More people are going to want to know about different angles and learning, and that's what we're going to do in the Handicappers Corner each week. This week I want to tackle a subject, injuries. They're part of every sport. We're going to talk about specifically with football in this one. And the first thing I want to say, Ralph, about injuries, and I'll get your idea about it, is that most of the time, that first game, whenever there's an injury, a star player's out, the value is going to be, in my opinion, on the injured team, because the public is going to overreact to the star being out, for one. Vegas knows which way the betting's going to go in the game. The public's going to come in and want to bet against that injured team, so they're going to try to get ahead of that line movement a little bit. They adjust it for the injury to start with, and then they adjust for where they figure the public's going to come. I actually call it the injured player theory. I feel that the rest of the team, that first game, Ralph, they're going to play at a different level. They're going to play with 110% intensity. And on the flip side to that, sometimes the opposing team has a little bit of a mental letdown because, oh, well, we dodged a bullet, so-and-so, the star's out of the lineup, we caught a break here. So you might get one team at a maximum effort and another team maybe not as focused as they should be, and you throw in an inflated line. I think that's a recipe for success more often than not. But then as we move forward, that loses its luster after the first game, especially if they manage to go out and win that game. What are your thoughts as far as overrated or underrated on the injury?
I couldn't agree with you more. The first game back, and even in the North Coast days, we had an injury system where if the star player, now we're only talking a handful of people, the quarterback, the running back, the top wide receiver, that type of situation, when you have, and many times those injuries are so overrated because your backups are so close. We'll talk about that a little further. But I do agree with you that in the college game and in the pro game, when one of your star players is hurt, you do get a bounce from your team, you may get a letdown from the opposition, and you do get an overvalued line where I completely agree that don't overlook or don't overestimate how good the backups can be in that situation.
Because, quite frankly, we don't really know how good the backups are going to be. And the things that I want to look at, you talk about college football, and we're going to talk about, both NFL and college. Obviously, there's certain players that, put teams at different levels. But when you talk about a college football team, and let's say, the number one running back's hurt. Well, if you're a team like Alabama, they generally got a roster 3 deep, Ralph, of guys that could start on any other team in college football for the most part. The big names are going to be, have depth. You just don't know who that star is yet because you haven't seen them play. So,
we saw Alabama. I mean, Alabama has a quarterback who had a 21-3 ratio. That's off the top of my head. Won every game. Gets pulled at the half, a player steps in who never played and leads them to the win. So, I mean, that you can't have more of an example than that. And the player didn't get hurt. He just got pulled because he was ineffective. So that just shows you the depth they have on that rosters.
Absolutely. Now, when you get to certain positions, they have more value. And I think, and we've talked about this, on the podcast and other situations, but the offensive line, Ralph, this is a spot where if your offensive line has 1 or 2 key injuries, it's a big deal because this is what makes the whole offense go. This is what gives you your pass blocking and run blocking. You've got certain schemes you run in your running game, certain things you do to protect the quarterback. And when you get a couple players hurt, 1 or 2 key players, that's significant on the offensive line because it changes assignments. And sometimes you got to get a guy not play his natural position to slide over and fill in for somebody else that's hurt, and then you sometimes have a breakdown, in assignments. You get a quarterback can get blindsided, on a blitz because the guy misses his assignment and cause a turnover. So the offensive line, I really look hard at as far as injuries.
Can't agree more. And, there's instances where, let's say, a team is missing 4 starters, 2 on offense, 2 on defense, a running back, an offensive line, a linebacker, and a cornerback. If you said, do you want 4 starters missing off one team, or do you want another team with 2 offensive linemen missing?
Yeah.
I would much rather have 4 starters missing from 4 different units than 2 offensive linemen from 1 unit. So you had talked about the units. You had talked how important they are. And, this is just something I'll share with our listeners. And this is going back to the North Coast days. And it's an NFL number. And it, I've never worked it out for college. Haven't been able to do it like that. But when you have an NFL center who has played at least 5 games, so the team is accustomed to him being here, the offensive line is accustomed, and he misses, that first game out has been over a 70% ATS play against because he is besides some quarterbacks, not behind all quarterbacks. To me, he is the most important person on that team, and he doesn't get credit. You talk about taking care of that offensive line and watching who's injured. Make sure that center is part of your handicapping every week, that he's not on that list and he's not injured.
Oh, I can tell you from the Pittsburgh Steelers, when Pouncey's not behind center, that team's not the same.
Miami as well last year with the other Pouncey.
Yeah,
it was.
Talk about making a couple centers, man. Production there with that family. We talk about, you mentioned about, having different injuries. One thing to be careful of when you are looking at injuries is when you have a cluster effect. If you've got a cluster of injuries at one area, that is a problem because you only have so many backups. And, the backups, when you got to get all of them on the field at the same time, if you got a couple linebackers out or something, that's a different story than just having, an isolated injury, to a key player at one of the positions. If you're losing, it's sometimes worse to have two average guys out in the same area than one star in an area. So look at that. And one other thing I'll add, and then I'll throw it back to you, Ralph. One thing that I do look at, and the most notable injury that people are going to overreact, well, because it's the luxury of the quarterback position. Everybody looks at he's going to make the team go, and they want to overreact when they miss that starting quarterback in there. Is look at a couple things. One, does the backup have any experience? If it's many times a lot of teams carry a guy that's probably, maybe at the back end of a career, but he has started before. We've got a situation this year in Tampa Bay. Jameson Winston's going to be out with a suspension for the first few games. I don't think they're going to be in trouble. Ryan Fitzpatrick, although he's not a great quarterback, he's a journeyman quarterback that's going to be able not to wreck the bus, for 3 weeks until he gets back. Look at a guy that has experience. Also, when I'm looking at how I'm going to handicap if this team's going to be okay or not, two things I like to have is if I've got a team that's got a great defense. If they got a great defense, that defense can help carry that offense for a week or two with an injury. And then as far as the team goes, if it's an offensive player, and of course if it's a quarterback, everybody overreacts to the quarterback position. But if they've got that journeyman and they got a good running game behind them that can help take the pressure off the quarterback, that'll ease it a little bit. Now, if you got a team that's got a backup quarterback and no running game, then you might think about it a little bit more and dig a little deeper. But those are the things that I like to look at.
And, let's bring in, we have two quarterbacks that have been suspended to start the year, and they were quite different. We had Tom Brady in New England. Well, New England had the whole summer to prep their backup quarterback, and we saw Brady's lines getting affected by about 5.5 or 6 points. Now, he's actually the creme de la creme. Now, we know Winston's going to miss the first 3 games this year. We have already seen the line moves because CG Technologies puts out their games. The line only moved 1.5 points, and I'm not even sure he's worth that much. I mean, you have Ryan Fitzpatrick. Number one, you talked about having an experienced backup. Well, Ryan Fitzpatrick was on this team last year. He started games because Winston got hurt. So he knows the situation. He knows the teams. That makes him much more comfortable. And let's remember, Ryan Fitzpatrick was on the Jets the previous 2 years to being on Tampa Bay. He led the Jets to a record 1 game under 500. Hell, there's not many quarterbacks that can play 500 with the Jets, but he did it. He was 1 game under 500, 2 complete years. So you have an experienced backup who's been with the team for a year. You don't have the injury system in effect because this is well announced. This isn't 1 week to a next when you're making midweek adjustments. So make sure you don't treat those the same. The Brady situation, all during preseason they prepped. Tom Brady played week 4 of the preseason because they wanted his backup to play week 3 with the starters. Those situations aren't going to happen, but they are going to occur this year where you have Ryan Fitzpatrick right now knowing he's the quarterback for at least 3 games of the 16-game season, and they could prep them accordingly.
Good stuff, Ralph, as always. And, guys, I hope you like this segment. Again, if you got some topics you want us to talk about, shoot us an email. You can hit me at marco@wagertalk.com. You can hit me up on Twitter. Ralph's on Twitter as well. Anything that you want to do. Ralph, give listeners your Twitter handle.
It's at CalSportsLV, CalSportsLV. If you like bizarre things in the baseball schedule, make sure you follow me now. How teams do as 300 favorites, how many times teams have been 200 favorites, teams that aren't road dogs, anything you need looked up like that. Follow me on Twitter, DM me, shoot me an email. I'm happy to help you out with any of those records.
And you can follow me at Marco in Vegas. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to preview 3 baseball games for the weekend here on the Wager Talk Podcast. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the Wager Talk Podcast. Time to check out the weekend baseball action. We've got 3 good ones, and it kicks off Friday night. Atlanta at Milwaukee. Ralph, we've got Mike Fulton Nevis against Peralta of the Brewers. And, guy, you look at Fulton Nevis, what a year he's having. And this guy, I didn't see this coming from him this year, Ralph. You look at his ERA over his last 9 starts, 0.87. He's allowed 2 runs or less in 15 of 16 games this year. Kind of hard to get any better than that.
Yeah, and, you add the Braves to it. The Braves are the second most profitable away dog on the year. They're 17-14. They're plus 9.3 units. So, an average line is plus $1.40, and you're playing well on the road. Peralta, he's a 22-year-old rookie. The guy throws 84% fastballs, and his velocity tops out at 92 miles per hour. So you look at him and you think this isn't going to be able to last his success. 3-1 with a 2.28 ERA and 5 starts this year. The problem is when you get to the second time through the lineup, the hitters start to find him, and he only averages 5 innings per start. But when you have Milwaukee's bullpen, that's okay. This is a great pitching matchup, and, it's a game that I'm going to clearly look at. And there's times that you think the under's the obvious play, but these pitchers aren't household names, so I think you still get some value playing under. This isn't Kluber, Verlander, or Hershiser, Cueto, where you think, you're going to see the 6.5.
You're bringing Hershiser back out of retirement.
Yeah,
Kershaw.
Or Kershaw, thank you. All those Dodgers pitchers are the same, But, showing my age, right?
Yeah. Well, you could find Hershiser sometimes out at Red Rock. He plays at the Red Rock Poker Room. I've seen him there many times.
But again, when you have 2 pitchers pitching the way they are, and the other important thing is, this is Peralta's first time facing Atlanta. When he starts seeing a team the second time, I may start to look to play against him. We'll see what pans out in the next few games. But being the first time through, if you're going to get 5 good innings and then you send it to the Milwaukee bullpen, and then you have Fulte doing what he's doing, I think the under is clearly the play here. It seems obvious, but I don't think it's going to be a public obvious play.
Yeah, I can't disagree with the under, but where I'm going to go with this one is I'm going to go with Atlanta, but you kept bringing up that Milwaukee bullpen, and I agree with you 100%, and that's why my play is Atlanta first 5 innings, because I feel if Atlanta doesn't have the lead when we get to the bullpen, we're not going to win the ball game. So I'm going to take it. Fulton Nevis versus Peralta. Let's go head-to-head for 5 innings. I think Atlanta gets the job done. The other part of it is, even if Peralta is pitching decent, this Milwaukee team's struggling to score runs. 4 of their last 5 games, Ralph, they've scored 3 runs or less. So this is not where I want to be with a team laying a little price at home. I'll take Atlanta. I'll take Fulton Nevis. I like them here first 5 innings for my side on this one. Moving to Saturday, I'm excited to see this pitching matchup. We've got Colorado with Kyle Freeland on the mound, and Seattle's got John Paxton. Paxton's pitched well this year. We know he threw a no-hitter earlier in the year. Ralph, This Seattle team, I know you got some crazy numbers on them and what they've been doing at home. I'll throw it to you first, and then I'll follow.
Well, Seattle is by far the best home favorite in baseball. Be it a true home edge, be it just the way they're playing. 18-4 as a home favorite. And as a favorite overall, they have now won 16 straight games. That's right, 16-0 when listed as a favorite. You look at Paxton, and as you mentioned, he has the no-hitter. But listen to these months. March and April, a +5 ERA, an ERA over 5. In May, he was 3-0 with a 1.67 ERA. Back to June, bad. 3-1 with a 4.97 ERA. And now July, 1-0 with a 3.39 ERA. Now, I can say this. In his June starts, he had 5 starts. 4 of them were on the road, and he did have to face Boston, Houston, and the Yankees. So the schedule does have something to say to that 4.97 ERA. But Kyle Freeland, boy, has anyone turned it around, he has. In April, he was 1-4 with a 4.24 ERA. His last 11 starts, 7-2, a 2.7 ERA. And, oh yeah, by the way, Colorado has been the most profitable away dog in baseball. They are 17-12 as an away dog, plus 11.8 units.
Kyle Freeland, he was. I had him this week. I went with him against Baumgartner. He was down 2-0 early, but he settled down, gave up those 2 runs early, and then didn't give up anything after that. He's had now 4 straight starts, Ralph, where he's given up 2 runs or less. And what's amazing about Freeland, he pitches better at home than on the road. And you're saying, well, doesn't most guys pitch better at home than on the road? Not at Coors Field. You're not supposed to pitch well at Coors Field. That ball carries there. And he's pitched well both places, don't get me wrong, but his ERA is lower at Coors than it is on the road, which is just absolutely phenomenal. I'm looking at him. Paxton, as you talked about, his home-away splits are equal pretty much. 3.31 ERA at home, 3.45 on the road. But where there is one difference is his day games, and this game is a Saturday afternoon game. His ERA in day games this year is 4.32. Not overly bad, but compared to his other numbers, that's his worst situation. I'm going to go ahead with Freeland just because I'm getting a price here. Colorado had been playing bad for so long. They finally put some wins together. I'm going to keep them to ride this streak right now. And it's hard to jump in front of Seattle at home, but I think because of that record, the market's going to start making you pay a price for Seattle. And I'm going to go ahead and take a look at Colorado in this one.
Well, you talked about Freeland. His last 13 starts, he's allowed 3 earned runs or less in 12 of those. Yep. And in the one bad game, in quotations, he allowed 4 runs against Arizona. So incredible. Yeah. Marco, moving to Sunday. Arizona continues to be in the fight. San Diego had played well. They've struggled a little bit lately. We have Clayton Richard, the lefty, against Zach Greinke. What do you make of this game? Well,
this one, you're going to pay a price for this one, but I got to do it because has there been a guy that's been more dominant at home? Greinke, at the beginning of the season, his home and away ERA differential, the home-road dichotomy, was off the charts. He was just solid at home, couldn't do anything on the road. Now he's righted the ship. He's good right now everywhere, Ralph. He's put together 4 great starts in a row. He's given up just 5 runs in those 4 starts, and you look at his record, 9 home starts. He's got an ERA of 2.44, a whip, Ralph, of 0.99. Richards, on the other hand, his road ERA, his ERA is 5.01 and a whip of 1.35. Here's a stat for you, and it's the only one that really concerns me with Greinke. And Arizona wasn't playing well. They were on a losing streak again. He comes in. He was the stopper. He pitched on Tuesday night, I believe it was, got the win, snapped that losing streak, and he is their guy. When he's at home, throughout his entire career, This includes when he pitched for some bad teams. Remember, he pitched for Kansas City and stuff. Wasn't a household name like he is now with the Dodgers and then now at Arizona. But his record, or I should say his team's record in his starts, when he's at home and is a favorite, 114 wins, 42 losses in his career.
That's not bad. And, let me add a couple things. A lot of our notes on the same in this game because, Clayton Richard throws a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, struggles on the road, has a 6.12 ERA in his starts at Chase. You add in that Arizona is the number 5 slugging team with a slugging percentage of .442 against lefties. And, people think about Greinke and thinking, well, he's a few years separated from his great seasons. But I'll tell you what, I went back and looked today, and 2013 with the Dodgers, 2.63 ERA. 2014, 2.71 ERA. 2015, 1.66. Yes, he goes to Arizona. Yes, he has a 4.37 ERA, but that's Arizona without the new humidifier.
Yeah.
Last year, a 3.2 ERA, and again this year, again, a 3.36 ERA. Just a tremendous pitcher who has held on, and I agree with you that when you have Arizona playing a lefty, the way they hit lefties at home in this situation, if the line sneaks up a little high, you might have to play the run line in this one, but I'm with you in that game.
All right, that's going to wrap up this segment, guys. You know what's next. We'll be back. Best bet time, redemption time. We've got a best bet from Ralph, myself, and Carmine will share with you on the last segment. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the WagerTalk Podcast. It's the home stretch. This is the segment you wait for, the best bet segment. It's been feast or famine the last 2 weeks, Ralph. We went with the 3-0. Then we went with the old 0-3. That's not good, but we're still 18-15 on the show, so we're showing a profit. Let's get back on track this week. I'm going to start with you. You've got a Friday night game. Who are you looking at, buddy?
You know what? Earlier in the segment, we talked about San Diego going to Arizona, and we talked about Greinke being so good. Well, this game's on Friday, and I'm actually going to take the visitor. While San Diego has struggled going into their game on Friday, they have their sinker pitcher back, their rookie, Joey Lucchesi, the lefty. He's 4-3 with a 3.26 ERA. He hasn't made a start since May the 14th, and he came back. His first start back, the sinker was not working. He went 1 2/3 innings, pitched 4 runs. His second start back, he pitched 4 innings, gave up 1 hit, no runs. They pulled him out. They had him on a pitch count. His third start back, 5 innings, 1 hit, no earned runs. So in his last 2 starts, 9 innings pitched, 2 hits given up, 0 earned runs. He's already pitched in Arizona, which I like as a rookie. He's already gone to this venue. He pitched there back on April the 22nd. He did lose. He had 4 walks. He could not control the sinker at that time. But I like now that he's comfortable with the settings making this start. And Zach Godley, I'll tell you what, he's been god-awful. Since May the 23rd, 8 starts, a 6.75 ERA. There's just no way I'm going to back him. His last 4 starts, 21 2/3 innings pitched. He's given up 15 walks in 21 innings. I think you're going to get great value with San Diego. I'm all over Joey Lucchesi. Healthy, back, pitch counts off, the Padres on Friday.
All right, I'm going to go with a Friday game myself, and we're going to take a look at Philadelphia as they invade Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's coming off a West Coast road trip, Ralph, and I don't like taking teams that first game back at home, especially a team that's not playing well. And the Pirates, they're limping home. 4 of the last 5 games on the road trip they lost, and this was not a short road trip. Pirates started it out with 3 in New York against the Mets. Then they went to San Diego for 3, and then they finished it up with 3 against the Dodgers. In that Dodgers series, 3 games, the Pirates gave up 17, 8, and 6 runs, just totally got pounded. Bullpen got overworked in that series. Now we're looking at them playing a Philadelphia team. This Philadelphia team's won 6 of their last 7 games, Ralph. They're sending Nick Pivetta to the mound, and although he's coming off a bad game, his 2 starts before that were excellent. Went 5 innings at Washington, gave up just 2 runs, and before that gave up just 2 runs as well in 7 1/3 innings against St. Louis. That last start that I said that was bad, I want to point out the fact that it was back-to-back starts against the same team. After holding Washington to just 2 runs, the next having to face them right back again, Washington was able to get to him. He had his worst outing in the year. I look for him to bounce back in this one in a big way. For the Pirates, it's Trevor Williams going, and his last start, not good. He went 4 2/3, gave up 4 runs in that game. This is a spot where I am just looking at the Pirates not playing well, starting pitcher that's been basically average most of the season. When he pitches, the Pirates are 8-9 on the season. And you look at a bullpen overworked. You look at a team that's just not playing well, returning from the road trip. Got a hot team in Philadelphia. I'm going to go ahead and take Philadelphia in this one against my Pirates and make them my best bet for this week.
Marco, is there still a rivalry in this Keystone State, or with what they've done the last few years, it really hasn't meant anything?
It's not meant anything like it used to be when they were in the same division way back in the day, yeah, but not so much anymore. And for the Pirates, it's that time of the season. We were talking about them 2 months ago in May. We were surprised. Middle of May, the Pirates were hanging around. They were in that 4-team race for first place, and they even were in first place for a few days. Now they're fading fast, and it's going to set in. We talked about it many times with the Pirates at the beginning of the year, and I know every time I bring this up, there's somebody in this room that smiles. But the wholesale fire sale, getting rid of Garrett Cole, to Houston and that set the tone for this team, I think, for this season. The key piece to that trade's been injured on and off a lot this year in Musgrove. So it's a spot where I'm not sold on the Pirates, and I'm going to step in front of them.
Marco, Carm had to leave, but I know he gave us a best bet. Let's finish off this trio of best bets with a big MLS winner. Tell us what it is.
I think this is our first MLS best bet on the show, and he's going to Saturday. Got Minnesota United playing the Houston Dynamos. Is that correct there? The Dynamos? Yeah, okay, all right. Houston Dynamos, and the over-under on it is 3. And Carm said to take the over 3 in this one on Saturday. Not like the World Cup, where we saw all those 2s and shaded to the under. He says take this one over 3.
Guys, and we talk about all the time, while our best bets are usually on the main sports, there's a lot of value to be had when you're studying Canadian football or the WNBA or MSL, MLS, like Carm does follow full time. Don't discount. It's a lesser league. The play is just as strong and just as important. Take advantage when you find that value, and hopefully he cashes a nice Major League Soccer winner for us.
All right, guys, that's going to wrap up this week's show. I want to thank our guests, Carmine, Bianco, Steve Pugh. Want to thank my partner in crime, Ralph Michaels. And, of course, keeping us sounding good behind the controls is Mark Seidel. Shout out to Johnny Detroit, who gets us uploaded to all of the social media sites. And you can subscribe to iTunes and get the podcast each week. Check us out on iHeartRadio. Until next week, I am Marco D'Angelo. Let's cash some tickets. Talk to you next week.